The year was 2847, and humanity had been part of the Galactic Federation for 300 years. In that time, they had built trade routes across 1,000 star systems. They had shared their medicine, their art, and their knowledge with dozens of alien species. They had smiled at insults and walked away from fights. The galaxy knew humans as peaceful traders, nothing more. Admiral Daniel Harper stood on the observation deck of Earth Command Station, watching cargo ships drift past like slow metal whales. He was 62 years old, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too many reports of border incidents. Behind him, the door opened and Ambassador Laura Bennett walked in. "The Council rejected our request again," she said. Her voice was calm, but Harper heard the frustration underneath. "Which request?" he asked without turning around. "All of them. Reinforcing the border colonies. Increasing patrol routes. Even the request for a formal warning to the Vectari." She stood beside him and looked out at the stars. "They said it would be seen as aggressive." Harper made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. "The Vectari have taken 6 independent systems in the last 2 years. They have enslaved 3 species. But us moving some ships to protect our own people would be aggressive. That is how they see it. For 3 centuries, humanity had played a careful game. When they first reached the stars, they found a galaxy already full of life. Hundreds of species had formed the Galactic Federation, a loose alliance built on trade and mutual defense. Humans joined eagerly, hoping to find friends among the stars. What they found instead was a galaxy that feared them. Earth was what the aliens called a death world. The gravity was too strong. The predators were too many. The diseases were too varied. The simple fact that humans had survived their own planet made other species nervous. When they learned about human history, about the wars and violence that had shaped their evolution, that nervousness became something closer to terror. So humanity made a choice. They would be peaceful. They would be kind. They would prove that the violence in their past did not define their future. For 300 years, they kept that promise. The Vectari Dominion did not care about promises. They were a reptilian species from a hot world near the galactic core. They believed that strength was the only law that mattered. The weak existed to serve the strong, and the strong existed to conquer. They had been expanding for decades, swallowing smaller species and forcing them into service. Now they had turned their attention toward human space. Captain Kevin Shaw arrived at Earth Command 2 days later. He was the commander of the starship Resolute, one of the patrol vessels assigned to the outer colonies. He was young for a captain, only 38, but he had earned his rank through skill and patience. In his entire career, he had never fired a weapon in anger. "They hit another convoy," he reported to Admiral Harper. 3 cargo ships near the Epsilon Relay. The Vectari claimed they were searching for illegal weapons. "Were there any weapons on board?" Harper asked. "Medical supplies, food, children's clothing bound for the colony on New Portland." Shaw's jaw was tight. "They took everything and left the ships drifting. The crews were lucky to survive." This was the 5th such incident in 3 months. Each time, the Galactic Council urged patience. Each time, humanity filed formal complaints that went nowhere. Each time, the Vectari grew bolder. Ambassador Bennett arranged a meeting with the Vectari representative at the Council headquarters. She prepared for days, gathering evidence of their violations, building a case for sanctions. She believed that even the Vectari would respond to reason if presented with enough proof. She was wrong. The council chamber was vast, a circular room filled with representatives from across the galaxy. Ambassador Bennett stood at the central podium and presented her case. She showed recordings of attacked ships. She displayed medical records of injured crew members. She quoted treaties that the Vectari had signed and broken. When she finished, The Vectari ambassador rose to respond. His name was Kethros, and he was enormous, nearly 8 feet tall with scales the color of dried blood. He looked at Bennett the way a predator looks at something too small to be worth eating. "The human speaks of treaties," he said, his voice rumbling through the translator. "She speaks of laws and agreements. But these things are invented by the weak to protect themselves from the strong." He swept his gaze across the chamber. "The Vectari Dominion does not recognize the authority of the weak to limit the strong. We are offering peace," Bennett said. "Trade agreements, territory concessions, a path forward that benefits everyone." Kethros laughed. It was an ugly sound, like rocks grinding together. "You offer us what we can simply take. Your species hides behind your merchants and your diplomats, but we see what you truly are. Soft prey, pretending to be equals." He stepped closer to Bennett, towering over her. "Your ships are old. Your weapons are outdated. You have forgotten how to fight, if you ever knew." The chamber was silent. Representatives from a dozen species watched, waiting to see how the human would respond. Bennett did not step back. She looked up at the massive alien and spoke clearly. "We have not forgotten anything. We simply choose not to use what we remember." Kethros dismissed her words with a wave of his clawed hand. "Choices made by the weak are not choices. They are surrender by another name." The meeting ended without agreement. Bennett returned to Earth with nothing to show for her efforts except confirmation of what Admiral Harper already suspected. The Vectari were not interested in peace. They wanted conquest, and they saw humanity as too weak to stop them. 3 weeks later, intelligence reports confirmed their fears. Vectari warships were massing near the border. Over 200 vessels gathered at a staging point just outside human territory. Their target was obvious. Admiral Harper requested permission to reinforce the border colonies. He asked for ships, for weapons, for anything that might help protect the civilians in the path of the coming storm. The Galactic Council denied his request. They feared escalation. They urged continued diplomacy. Harper read their response and set it aside. Then he looked at his officers and gave an order that had not been given in 300 years. "Begin activation protocol. Wake the reserves." The sleeping giant was starting to stir. New Portland was a beautiful world. It had green forests that stretched for thousands of miles, oceans so clean you could see the bottom in shallow water, and mountains that touched the clouds. 4.2 million people called it home. Families had lived there for generations, building communities and raising children far from the crowded cities of Earth. Governor Amy Carson had led the colony for 12 years. She was 54 years old, a former teacher who had entered politics because she wanted to make her world a better place for children. She believed in diplomacy and talking through problems, and finding common ground with those who disagreed. On the morning of June 15th, 2847, she learned that some problems cannot be solved with words. Lieutenant Marcus Cole was 26 years old. He served at the Orbital Defense Station above New Portland, a small facility with minimal weapons and a crew of 40. It was never meant to fight a real battle. It was a watchtower, nothing more. He was drinking coffee when the sensors detected the incoming fleet. At first, he thought it was an error. The reading showed over 150 warships dropping out of faster than light travel near the colony. That was impossible. No one would send that many ships to attack a civilian world with almost no defenses. Then the first missiles launched, and Marcus understood that the impossible was happening. He sent the distress signal before the first impact hit his station. The message was short and desperate, broadcast on every frequency he could reach. New Portland under attack. Vectari fleet. Over 100 ships. Requesting immediate assistance. We have no chance here. Please send help. The station died 3 minutes later. Marcus and his crew never had time to fire a single shot in return. Down on the planet, Governor Carson was in her office when the sky began to burn. The orbital bombardment started with the military installations, such as they were. Then it moved to the spaceports. Then to the cities. The Vectari were not trying to conquer New Portland. They were trying to make an example. Dr. Nicole Price was the chief medical officer at Central Hospital in the colony's largest city. She was in surgery when the first bombs fell, carefully repairing a young boy's broken arm. The building shook so hard that she nearly dropped her instruments. What was that? She asked. No one answered. The power flickered, and then the emergency lights came on. Through the window, she could see fire falling from the sky. She finished the surgery in 4 minutes. Then she ran to the emergency wing and began preparing for what she knew was coming. The wounded arrived in waves. Burn victims. People crushed by falling buildings. Children separated from their parents. The hospital staff worked without rest, without hope, without any belief that help would arrive in time. Governor Carson organized the evacuation. She directed people to underground shelters, to caves, to anywhere that might offer protection from the bombardment above. She commandeered every vehicle she could find to move the injured and the elderly. She sent messages to the other cities, coordinating a response that everyone knew was hopeless. 3 passenger ships tried to escape the planet. They were civilian vessels, clearly marked, carrying women and children trying to flee the destruction. The Vectari shot them down without warning. 1,600 people died in seconds. Their ships turned to burning metal that fell back toward the planet. Like artificial meteors. The bombardment lasted for 6 hours. When it finally stopped, the Vectari broadcast a message across every channel that reached the planet's surface. "This is what happens to species too weak to fight," the alien voice said. "Surrender your remaining worlds or watch them burn. Humanity has no future except as servants of the Dominion. Accept this truth, and some of you may survive." The transmission ended. The Vectari fleet jumped away, leaving nothing behind except smoke and ash and the bodies of the dead. Final count: 1.8 million dead. More than a third of the colony's entire population. Among the dead were the wife and 2 children of Admiral Harper's chief of operations, the husband of Ambassador Bennett's senior aide, the parents of Captain Shaw. The news reached Earth 12 hours later. Admiral Harper received the casualty report in his office, alone. He read every page. He looked at the names, thousands and thousands of names, listed in small text that went on for hundreds of pages. Children, grandparents, families who had done nothing wrong except live on a world that the Vectari decided to destroy. When he finished reading, he sat in silence for a long time. Ambassador Bennett arrived at his office that evening. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "I've called for an emergency session of the Galactic Council. They're meeting tomorrow. What will they do?" Harper asked. "They'll offer strong condemnation. They'll suggest more negotiations. They'll urge restraint and patience." She paused. "They'll do nothing that matters." Harper nodded slowly. He had expected nothing else. 300 years, he said quietly. We buried our weapons. We smiled at their insults. We let them call us weak and soft and pray. We did everything right, Lara. Everything they asked. And this is what we get. Bennett said nothing. There was nothing to say. Harper stood and walked to his window. Outside, Earth turned slowly in the darkness. Blue and green and white, home to 11 billion people who were just now learning what had happened to their brothers and sisters on New Portland. "I want you to go back to the council," he said. "I want you to ask them one more time for permission to defend ourselves. They'll refuse. I know." He turned to face her. But I want history to show that we tried, that we gave them every chance. That when this is over, no one can say we didn't do everything possible to avoid what comes next. Bennett studied his face. What has come next? Admiral Harper looked at her with eyes that held no more patience, no more forgiveness, no more willingness to turn the other cheek. We stopped being nice. Deep beneath the surface of Mars, in tunnels that did not appear on any map, General Scott Palmer walked through corridors that had not seen light in decades. He was 70 years old, and he had spent his entire life guarding secrets that he hoped would never need to be revealed. Admiral Harper walked beside him. Neither man spoke. The only sound was their footsteps echoing off metal walls that stretched into darkness ahead. They reached a massive door, 10 meters tall and 5 meters thick. General Palmer pressed his palm against the scanner. He looked into a light that read his eyes. He spoke a code phrase that had been passed. Down through 5 generations of commanders, the door opened beyond. It lay the truth about humanity row after row. Warships filled a cavern so large that the far end disappeared into shadow. Each vessel was massive, bristling with weapons that made the Vectari's best ships look like children's toys. Thousands of them sat in perfect lines, waiting in silence for a call that humanity had prayed would never come. Iron Mountain, Palmer said. One of 17 such facilities hidden across human space. This one alone holds 400 ships of the line, each one capable of destroying a Vectari battle group single-handed. Harper stared at the fleet. He had known it existed. Every admiral learned the truth when they reached high command. But knowing was different from seeing. How long? He asked. We started building 3 weeks after we joined the Federation. When the other species looked at us and saw monsters, we understood something important. Palmer's voice was quiet. They were right to be afraid. Not because we wanted to hurt anyone, but because we knew what we were capable of if we ever had to. Commander Michelle Torres met them at the Central Command platform. She was 53 years old, a weapons specialist who had spent her career maintaining systems that were never meant to be used. She had trained crews in secret, run simulations in hidden facilities, and kept humanity's true strength ready for the day that everyone hoped would never arrive. All 17 facilities are reporting ready, she said. Full activation can be achieved in 72 hours. Do it, Harper said. Chief Engineer Ryan Peters joined them on the platform. He was 60 years old, the lead designer of the Hidden Fleet. He had devoted his life to building weapons of unimaginable power while hoping that his work would rust in storage forever. These ships use technologies we have never shared with the Federation, Peters explained. Weapons that can tear through any shield ever designed. Engines that can cross the galaxy in days instead of weeks. Armor that can survive direct hits from anything the Vectari possess. He paused. We are not just stronger than them. We are so far beyond them that they cannot even understand the gap. Harper nodded slowly. How did we keep this secret for 300 years? Compartmentalization, Palmer said. Every facility was built by different contractors, none of whom knew what the others were doing. The crews rotate through on cycles that prevent anyone from seeing the full picture. Even most of our government doesn't know. He looked at the ships stretching into the darkness. We built this because we remembered what we were before we reached the stars. Conquerors. Killers. A species that nearly destroyed itself a dozen times over. We're not that anymore, Harper said. No, but we never forgot how to be. If we needed to. The activation took 3 days. Across human space, hidden doors opened, and ships that had waited in darkness for centuries powered up their engines for the first time. Crews that had trained in secret reported to vessels that officially did not exist. A military force larger than anything the galaxy had ever seen prepared for war. On Earth, The government convened an emergency session. The president addressed the combined chambers of humanity's leadership. She explained what had been done, what had been hidden, and what would now be revealed. There was no debate, no arguments, no calls for more negotiations. 1.8 million dead civilians had ended those discussions forever. The vote was unanimous. Full military authorization was granted. Ambassador Bennett delivered the message to the Galactic Council. She stood at the same podium where she had tried to make peace with the Vectari, where she had offered compromises that were laughed away. This time, she did not offer anything. For 300 years, she said, humanity chose peace. We absorbed your insults. We buried our dead and still extended our hand in friendship. We were called soft, weak prey. We accepted those words because we believed that peace was worth more than pride. The chamber was silent. Representatives from across the galaxy watched the human ambassador with expressions ranging from confusion to fear. New Portland has shown us the price of that belief. 1.8 million of our people are dead. Not soldiers, families, children, people who simply wanted to live in peace on a world far from the conflicts that others created. She paused and looked at the Vectari ambassador. Kethros stared back at her with undisguised contempt. We offered you friendship. You gave us murder. We offered you trade. You gave us slavery. We offered you our hand, and you cut it off. Bennett's voice grew cold. That hand is now a fist. She activated a display behind her. Images of the hidden fleet filled the chamber. Ships beyond counting. Weapons beyond imagining. The representatives gasped. Several made sounds of pure terror. To the Vectari Dominion, we deliver this message. You have 72 hours to surrender unconditionally. You will release all prisoners. You will turn over all commanders responsible for the attack on New Portland. You will disarm your fleet and accept permanent monitoring of your territory. Kethros rose to his feet, his scales flushing dark with anger. You dare threaten us? We will burn your worlds to ash. Bennett ignored him. She continued speaking as if he had not made a sound. There will be no negotiation. There will be no extension. There will be no mercy. She looked directly at the Vectari ambassador. You wanted to see humanity fight. You are about to get your wish. She walked out of the chamber without looking back. The countdown had begun. War leader Kethvos stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the countdown timer approach 0. 72 hours had passed since the human ultimatum, and he had spent every minute of it laughing. The humans had shown impressive images. Pretty ships lined up in neat rows. Weapons that sparkled on display screens. It was theater, nothing more. A desperate bluff from a species that had forgotten how to fight generations ago. His fleet numbered 800 warships, the largest force the Dominion had ever assembled. Behind them waited transport vessels carrying invasion troops, ready to claim human worlds as new territory for the Empire. The humans could not stop what was coming. No one could. All ships report ready, his second-in-command announced. The fleet awaits your order. Kethvos showed his teeth in what passed for a smile among his species. Advance. Let us teach these soft creatures the cost of making threats they cannot support. The Vectari fleet moved forward in perfect formation, engines burning bright against the darkness of space. They crossed the border into human territory and headed toward their first target, a colony world called Haven's Rest. 2 million humans lived there. Soon, they would either serve the Dominion or die. The fleet traveled for 3 hours without incident. Sensors showed empty space in every direction. No human ships. No defense platforms. Nothing at all. Kethvos allowed himself to feel satisfied. The humans had run away, just as he expected. Their ultimatum had been nothing but empty words. Then space itself seemed to crack open. Ships appeared everywhere at once. Not dozens or hundreds, but thousands. They emerged from concealment in a ring around the Vektari fleet, blocking every direction of escape. The darkness filled with vessels so large that the Vektari flagships looked like insects beside them. Kethvos stared at his sensors, unable to process what they showed. That cannot be right. Count them again. His officers counted. Then counted again. Then began to make sounds of fear. 4,000 human warships surrounded the Vektari fleet. Each one was at least 3 times the size of the largest Vektari vessel. Their weapons arrays glowed with power levels that the sensors could barely measure. A transmission came through on all channels. Captain Katie Morgan appeared on every screen, commander of the assault carrier Judgment. She was 45 years old, with short brown hair and eyes that showed no emotion at all. Vektari fleet, this is your one and only warning. Power down your weapons and prepare for boarding. Any ship that resists will be destroyed. You have 60 seconds to comply. Kethvos found his voice. You dare threaten us? We are the Dominion. We will tear your pathetic fleet apart. Captain Morgan's expression did not change. 50 seconds. All ships, attack formation. Destroy them. The Vektari fleet opened fire. Hundreds of missiles and energy beams lanced out toward the human ships. A barrage that would have devastated any fleet in the known galaxy. The human ships did not bother to dodge. The weapons struck their shields and disappeared like raindrops hitting stone. Not a single shot penetrated. 30 seconds, Morgan said. Kethvos felt something he had never felt before. Fear. True fear. The kind that made his scales go pale and his heart beat too fast. All power to shields. Full retreat. Move. But there was nowhere to go. The human ships had surrounded them completely. A wall of metal and weapons that stretched in every direction. Time expired, Captain Morgan said. The human fleet opened fire. Lieutenant Eric Grant flew his fighter through the heart of the battle, if it could be called a battle. He was 28 years old, and he had been stationed on New Portland when the Vektari attacked. He had watched from orbit as his home burned. He had seen the passenger ship shot down. He had listened to the screams on the communication channels as millions of people died. Now he watched as the Vektari learned what humanity could do when it stopped being nice. Human weapons cut through Vektari shields like they were made of paper. Ships that had terrorized 100 worlds exploded in seconds. The Dominion fleet, so proud and confident an hour ago, came apart like dry leaves in a hurricane. Grant felt nothing. No satisfaction. No joy. Just a cold emptiness where his anger had been. His parents had died on New Portland. His sister. His childhood friends. Everyone he had ever loved was gone, and killing Vektari would not bring them back. But it would make sure no one else had to feel what he felt. Kethvos watched his fleet die around him. 800 ships became 600. Then 400. Then 200. The humans were not just winning. They were erasing the Dominion military from existence. Please, he broadcast on open channels. We surrender. We accept your terms. Stop this. Captain Morgan's voice came back cold and flat. You had 72 hours to surrender. That time has passed. Have mercy. You showed no mercy to New Portland. You showed no mercy to the children on those passenger ships. You made your choice. Now live with the consequences. The flagship shields failed. Warning lights filled the bridge. Kethvos closed his eyes and waited for death. It did not come. When he opened his eyes, his ship was drifting, powerless but intact. Around him, the last remnants of the Vektari fleet floated in the same condition. Their weapons destroyed. Their engines dead. but the crew's still alive. You will be taken as prisoners, Morgan announced. You will face trial for war crimes. The commanders responsible for New Portland will be executed. The rest will spend the remainder of your lives remembering what you did and what it cost. The battle was over. 6 hours from start to finish. 800 Vectari warships destroyed or disabled. Not a single human vessel had taken serious damage. Admiral Harper stood on the bridge of his command ship, watching the aftermath on his screens. Captain Shaw stood beside him, saying nothing. Set course for Vectari Prime, Harper ordered. It's time to finish this. The human fleet gathered itself and moved deeper into enemy territory. Behind them, they left nothing but wreckage and the broken remains of an empire that had believed humanity was prey. The galaxy watched, and the galaxy trembled. Vectari Prime was a world of red deserts and burning skies. 50 billion people lived there, crowded into massive cities built for war and conquest. For 1,000 years, they had sent their fleets out to claim other worlds, never imagining that anyone would ever threaten their home. Now 4,000 human warships hung in orbit above their planet, and the people of Vectari Prime learned what it felt like to be helpless. Admiral Harper looked down at the alien world from his command ship. He thought about New Portland. He thought about 1.8 million dead civilians. He thought about children vaporized in their beds and families burned to ash, while they tried to flee, thought he could end the Vectari forever. One command, and his fleet would reduce their cities to craters. 50 billion lives erased to avenge less than 2 million. The math was simple. The justification was clear, but that was not who humanity wanted to be. Open a channel to their government, Harper ordered. Let's see if they're ready to talk. Elder Senara had opposed the war from the beginning. She was old by Vectari standards, nearly 200 years, and she had seen enough conquest to know that empires built on blood eventually drowned in it. No one had listened to her warnings. The war leaders had been too confident, too hungry, too certain that humanity was prey. Now those war leaders were dead or captured, and she was the only one left with enough authority to speak for her people. She appeared on the communication screen. Her scales faded with age, her eyes filled with something that might have been shame. Human Commander, I am Elder Senara. I speak for what remains of Vectari leadership. You know why we're here, Harper said. I do. She lowered her head, a gesture of submission that no Vectari leader had made in 1,000 years. We accept your terms. All of them. Unconditional surrender. Disarmament. Trials for war criminals. Reparations. Permanent monitoring. Her voice cracked. Whatever you demand, we will give. Harper studied her face. He saw no deception there. Only defeat, total and complete. Why did you do it? He asked. New Portland was no threat to you. Those people were farmers, teachers, children. Why did you kill them? Senara was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because we thought you were weak. Because you chose peace when we believed only war made a species worthy of respect. Because you smiled at our insults and walked away from our provocations, and we mistook your patience for cowardice. She looked up at him with eyes that glistened. We thought you were weak because you chose not to fight. We understand now. You were not weak. You were kind. And we made you stop being kind. The surrender was completed within hours. Vectari military commanders were taken into custody. Their fleet was dismantled. Occupation forces landed to ensure compliance, though there was no resistance. The fight had gone out of the Dominion completely. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session 3 days later. Representatives from every member species gathered in the Great Chamber, and for the first time in centuries, they looked at the human delegates with something other than condescension. Ambassador Bennett walked to the central podium. Behind her, the seats usually reserved for human observers were now filled with military officers in dress uniforms. Admiral Harper, General Palmer, Captain Morgan, Captain Shaw, the architects of humanity's victory, silent and stern. Council Speaker Vorn called for order. He was a tall, thin being with 4 arms and skin the color of copper. He had led the council for decades, always treating humanity as a minor species to be managed rather than respected. Now his hands trembled as he spoke. The council recognizes the representative of Earth. Bennett stood at the podium where she had once begged for help, where she had offered compromises that were rejected, where she had been laughed at by creatures who thought humanity was nothing. 300 years ago, she began, humanity joined this federation. We came in peace, hoping to find friends among the stars. We were warned that our history made us dangerous, that our violent past meant we could never be trusted. So we made a choice. She looked around the chamber at the representatives who watched her with fearful eyes. We buried our weapons. We forgot our wars. We became merchants and diplomats and artists. We let you call us weak and soft and prey. We accepted your contempt because we believed that proving we could be peaceful was more important than proving we could be strong. Her voice hardened. New Portland was the price of that belief. 1.8 million people who did nothing wrong except trust that the galaxy would not punish them for humanity's choice to be kind. Speaker Vorn shifted uncomfortably. The council deeply regrets the tragedy at New Portland. If there is anything we can do to assist with rebuilding, we do not need your assistance. Bennett's words cut like blades. We need you to understand what happened and why. She activated a display showing the human fleet. Thousands of ships, weapons beyond imagination, a military force that could conquer the entire Federation in months. This is what we hid from you. This is what we built while we smiled at your insults and pretended to be harmless. Because we knew that if we ever showed you our true strength, you would fear us. And we did not want to be feared. She turned off the display. But we learned something from New Portland. Kindness without strength is just weakness with better intentions. Peace offered by those who cannot fight is just surrender dressed in nicer words. We chose to be gentle because we were strong enough to afford it. The Vitari thought our gentleness meant we had forgotten how to be anything else. She paused and let the silence fill the chamber. They were wrong. Ambassador Bennett gathered her notes. Humanity will remain in the Federation. We will honor our trade agreements. We will continue to pursue peace and cooperation. But the mask is gone now. You have seen what we truly are. What we have always been, hiding behind smiles and patience. She looked at Speaker Vorn directly. We did not want this. We never wanted this. For 3 centuries, we built our weapons and prayed we would never use them. We buried our pride, swallowed insults, and chose peace because we remembered what we were, what we could become. Her voice dropped, and the chamber fell completely silent. You have seen now what happens when patience ends. Let this be the last lesson any species ever needs. She walked out of the chamber. The human delegation followed. No one tried to stop them. No one spoke at all. 6 months later, Admiral Harper stood on New Portland's surface. The colony was being rebuilt slowly. New settlers were arriving to help. But for now, most of the world was still scarred and empty. He stood before a memorial wall. Black stone stretched for nearly a mile, carved with the names of everyone who had died. 1.8 million names, listed in rows so small that you had to stand close to read them. Captain Shaw joined him. They stood together in silence, reading names of people they had never met. Was it worth it? Shaw asked finally. Harper thought about the question. He thought about the dead. He thought about the living. He thought about the future that humanity would now face. Knowing that the galaxy saw them for what they truly were, Ask me when no one else has to die because someone thought humanity was prey." Shaw nodded slowly. They stayed at the memorial until sunset. Then they returned to their ships and went back to work. There was still a galaxy to protect, still a Federation to participate in, still a future to build. The human fleet returned to its hidden bases. The weapons were stored. The mask of peaceful traders went back on, a little thinner than before, but now everyone knew what lay beneath it, and no one would ever forget.